All right, well, I think that the best way to sum up this discussion is to suggest that for both managers and council, they ought to be seeking clarity as to what that relationship is between the elected officials and the department heads.
You are listening to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. Twice each month, Gregg and Jae draw on their combined 80-plus years of state and local government work experience to help listeners avoid the pitfalls they and others have unwittingly stumbled into. And now, on to the episode.
Well, welcome to another episode of Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. This is Gregg Jae.
And this is Jae Jae.
Jae, had an interesting experience at a recent council meeting that I attended. The question came up about contacts between council members and department heads and what the nature of that is and whether or not it should happen. And before I kind of launch into my thoughts about it, I thought I'd let you have the first shot at expressing your point of view on whether or not elected council members should have regular and ongoing contact outside of council meetings with members of the executive team, with department heads.
Well, boy, that's a tough question. I mean, on the surface, it seems innocuous enough, but I can tell you from personal experience in one of the assignments that I had a council member who would make appearances at the DPW or in the village office all too frequently, and then and on several occasions I recall he came in 5 times in one day, and it to the point where it was disruptive. To me, to the other staff, and of course, to the DPW. And then in other occasions, there have been contacts with elected officials and employees, at the DPW, sometimes at the facility even, but, out on the street. So it gets to be a conflict then, because the employees don't always recognize, well, if an elected official is making a demand or even making a request, which in my opinion, when they're an elected official, even if it's a request, it comes across as a demand, and whether they should respond to that or not. So we've had a lot of discussions, I'm sure, over the years, not you and I, but I mean with staff, right, with employees, over the years, on at what point do they draw the line, and to get to kind of the end of the conversation oftentimes is, if you're unsure, refer them back to the administrator or manager.
Right. Well, let me ask you in that respect, when you have gone into a position as manager, what kind of conversation have you had with your department heads about that issue, about those kinds of contacts with elected officials? What has been kind of your standard that you have tried to set for the people that work for you when it comes to that? Because it's going to go on in some respect. Right. Do you try to prevent all of that? Do you try to establish conditions for that? How do you approach it?
Yeah, and that kind of depends on the situation. I think, first of all, I make it very clear that I am their line of defense, I guess, for lack of a better term.
No, I think that's an entirely appropriate line of way to express that.
Yep. Okay. Between they or their employees, if it's a department head, and the elected officials. And that's the way I try to start that out. If there's, when there's situations where maybe elected official runs across one of the employees, and they're out and about, and they tell them, hey, there happen to be patching potholes or something. They mentioned there's a pothole over there, or there's a dead animal in the street. We always, try to pick up the dead animals that are in the community before they get to be a problem. Something like that. Let's say that's more innocuous. I don't think it's so much of an issue.
Right.
Anyway, but if it gets to be something about, well, I want you to plow my street first in the wintertime, then it becomes a problem. And I can't say that I've experienced that exactly anyway, but I can think of situations where it might have come up with one elected official in particular. But when in 1 year when we had 8 feet of snow or something, but there's most DPW, either the employees or the director or supervisor, whatever the term might be, they have a specific route that they take, when they're plowing snow or doing maintenance on the roads, for that matter, to cover the major road, generally the major roads first, and then the local roads second, or whatever. So and it makes sense. I mean, it's done over the years with their experience. So I try not to interfere with that, certainly, and I always would say, if need be, to the elected officials, we don't want you to interfere with that either. They have a responsibility, and kind of the extension of that is most of the communities I've been in, of course, are very small communities, so they divide their time between whether it's DPW road type functions or parks or water plant or sewer lines. I mean, there's other things that they have to pay attention to, and they understand their priorities. So so I can't think that other than my personal experiences, I can't think that there's been major conflict that I've experienced anyway.
Yeah, I haven't either, and my practice has always been, when I've gone into a new community, and I've done that 8 or 9 times now, I guess, between full-time jobs and interim jobs. I always try to make sure that there is some clarity for the department heads, so they have some sense as to how do I view this? And generally, it is the case that I think there is value in having the ability for council members to, call up a department head and come in and, talk to him about what's going on in his operations. And I tend to look at it saying, how is that any different for a council member, than it was when they were just a citizen? Any citizen can make contact with one of the department heads and set up a time to come in and talk to them about whatever they wanted to learn about. What I always try to make sure is clear to department heads is that they don't take orders from council members, and if there is an issue that is brought to their attention that they think is something that I should know about, then they want to make sure that I've been alerted to that, particularly if it's something that is going to maybe come up on a council meeting, and so I'm not blindsided by something that's raised by a council member in the course of those conversations. And at the same time, I have similar conversations with newly elected council members at the time that I do orientation sessions for them. I'll tell them, you're welcome to have that contact with department heads, much the same as you could have when you were a citizen. They are and will provide you they're available to provide you information. But they won't take orders from you. And so I've tried to make clear that there's a distinction there between, making contact with them for the purpose of, just having a conversation about what's happening in DPW or finance or whatever the area might be, and whatever else they, might want them to do, and that would take the form of an order. So I think that has been a useful way to make a distinction. And I've been, I've tried to provide some examples to them too. If they're contacted by the neighbor about a pothole at the end of the neighbor's driveway, they don't have to get in touch with me. It might be more efficient for them to get in touch directly with the department head over something like that, just to alert them that something like that is going on. And so it's a way of trying to recognize that council members are a part of the overall team of people that help to get things done at City Hall or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and the one area I'm just maybe speaking a little bit out of not out of turn necessarily, but not directly related to what you've just commented on. But in one instance where there was confusion, I think, was in a community where the police chief and the manager were directly appointed by and under the, I guess, authority or supervision of the elected council. Mm-hmm. And there were occasions when it became a problem or had some conflict if the manager was trying to give some direction to the police chief, and the police chief, could choose to ignore it, basically, because he or she was to take their orders from the elected officials, not from the manager. Mm-hmm. So, I think there can be conflicts in that, and I bring that up because I think it's important, even though this forum is more intended for managers, mm-hmm. but also we don't want to exclude the elected officials. If
right.
there's something to be learned from this, I think it's important, unless there's really good reason, everybody should be under the direction of one person, clearly under one person, and in mm-hmm. most cases the manager. And they may argue, well, the chief, there's, they have other duties and we need to control that, or for the clerk and treasurer, for instance, if they're those are appointed, important appointed positions anyway. But I still think it's helpful for employees to recognize they only have one boss at a time.
Yeah, but that can be tricky depending on the structure of the organization. I have worked in cities as a city manager where the clerk and treasurer were elected, and the police chief and fire chief were appointed by the mayor with the approval of the city council. Now, we all worked harmoniously together, but if it ever really came down to it and there was a conflict, I'm not so sure that that my word rules over the appointing authority. Then that's a real challenge for a manager, perhaps, in some situations. And my community was not unique. I know there are other similar circumstances out there. Interestingly, I had one community where the charter was very clear that all of the department heads reported to the manager and was responsible for the performance of their duties to the manager, except in one particular case, and that is the manager exercised no authority over the clerk as to the preparation of the council meeting minutes. And the intent of that was very, very clear, that you didn't want a manager influencing what the minutes said of the meeting that was the responsibility of the council. I never saw that as problematic. I had always had that policy anyway, that I wasn't going to interfere in the council meeting minutes. That's up to the clerk and the council to make sure they say what they want them to say. But this conversation between you and me arises because of this recent incident, and what was remarkable about this is that there was a division on the council in terms of their understanding of the relationship between council members and department heads. Some council members who were on longer had a very clear expectation that they were welcome to reach out and have conversations with department heads, whereas the newer council members, in the course of their orientation session with the former manager, had been told in no uncertain terms, you're not to do that. There is only one route of contact to the department heads, and that is through me as manager. And so it was really enlightening to those new council members to find out, well, that's not a hard and fast rule. Some people understood it one way and some another. And my attitude again goes back saying, when did your getting elected as a council member mean that you gave up the right that you had as a citizen to reach out to one of the heads of our operating departments?
Yeah. So the question then is I always like to have things in writing. So where do you put this in writing? Is it in the charter? Is it in ordinances? Is it in their their policies and procedures, or their council procedures, which sometimes they're separate from their policies and procedures? Where do you put that? So that's my question. No,
and I think that that's a really useful thing for managers to take a look at and see, is it written someplace that what that rule is? And I think in this particular instance, it's not in this one particular community. But I will tell you that I've seen variations. And so in one community, it was very clear in the charter that there was that one route of contact, and it meant that every single contact with the department had to go through the manager. I told council members to ignore that provision, that I felt that it was more beneficial for them to feel that they had the opportunity to reach out to department heads and that they didn't need to go through me for that. I had another charter where it was made very clear that the council members had the ability to contact department heads, and it specifically said for the purpose of inquiry, meaning if you had a question and that question was best answered by a department head, you had the right to call them up, but you didn't give them orders. And so I think that there are likely situations where there are charter provisions that may be a component of the administrative plan ordinance if a community has that. But I suspect that there are other instances when the charter and ordinances are silent on the issue, and then it's a matter of establishing what is the what works best in this community, what is the past practice, and is there a reason to to vary from that, or to modify that, or to tighten it up, whichever the case might be, based on what the practices, what has worked well and what has worked poorly. But I think that the suggestion that in the absence of charter or ordinance language that council rules of procedure might be a way of clarifying that is, it allows then for council members among themselves at the time that they're reviewing that policy change to then make sure everybody's on the same page and that there is an understanding with the manager as to what's the best way to do this, and to provide that guidance that, again, you can contact department heads for purposes of inquiry, but they're not going to take orders from you.
We'll return to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned in a moment. Do you have a topic you would like Gregg and Jae to explore? Are you interested in being a guest on Lessons Learned? Do you have comments about this episode? You can write Gregg and Jae using the contact form at greggllc.com/lessons. That's greggllc.com/lessons.
It's an interesting issue. I think that this, it'll be interesting to see what kind of responses other managers might have to that. I can tell you from a recent visit I had in another community, a community where I'm doing some other consulting work, that this question came up, and the manager there basically took the same position as I have expressed, which is reach out to department heads, get to know them. Feel free to go down and visit their department heads. They are available to provide information to you, and so it was consistent with exactly the approach that I have taken with working with council members. But I suspect that there are other managers out there who really are not comfortable with that. And their management style is one where they want to keep a tight rein on the communications up and down through the organization chart. And so they're going to be very insistent that those communications go through them. Now, I want you to maybe put on your former elected official hat and think about how you're likely to view a situation where a manager is keeping that tight of control over the communications within the organizations. I don't know what your practice was when you were serving as a village president and we're on the council, but as far as communications with department heads, but how do you view that? How would you view a manager that's keeping that kind of tight control over communications in the organization?
I guess it depends on if it has created an issue or a conflict of some sort. Certainly as village president, I would share some of my thoughts with the other elected officials too. I'm trying to think back of, I guess I can't think of a very good example here to illustrate this, but I generally just thought it was important as the chief elected official at that time to share with council anytime I had some thoughts on it. And in that particular instance, that was a situation where the council had direct responsibility for the police chief. Anyway, but there was some situations where I felt that the manager wasn't acting in what I thought was the best interest of the municipality, where I did share some things with council, not to the extent, it wasn't serious to the extent that you need to reprimand the manager or threaten their job or any of that kind of thing, but just something where they had been doing things the way they saw fit for such a long period of time without any kind of oversight, I guess, on it, that I just thought, okay, this has progressed now to a point where we need to rein them back in a little bit. So anyway. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that the best way to sum up this discussion is to suggest that for both managers and council, they ought to be seeking clarity as to what that relationship is between the elected officials and the department heads. And there will be opportunities for variations depending on the nature of the community and their charter and ordinance provisions and their past history. But I think that it is one of those things where it's best to have a conversation between the manager and the council to make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody understands what should be happening before an issue arises.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Well, Jay, it was your opportunity to find a sponsor for this episode, and I know that you have, so I am just so anxious to hear what you've come up with here.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm going to start off with a question, but for you, but you're aware, or are you aware, how much that birds like bread? They even have commercials on TV, I think, about this. But are you aware of that? I
am aware that at least some birds are fans of bread. I've taken my kids down to feed the ducks on occasion when they were tiny. they're in their 30s and 40s. They're no longer interested in going to throw breadcrumbs to the ducks.
Well, on one occasion I thought I had seen everything, but I was looking out the kitchen window some time ago, and I saw this what I thought was a large black bird flying directly towards me, but it had a big white breast, and I thought, what in the world kind of bird is that? And as it was flying closer and closer, I saw that it was a crow with an entire slice of white bread. Must have been stale because it wasn't tearing apart. It was in its beak, hanging down from its beak, flying right at the house. And I think it was using the slice of bread as a spoiler, like you would have on a car, to try to gain some lift. But it was working in the opposite direction. And for a few brief seconds, I thought the bird was going to fly into the window, but it managed to clear the eave and continued on. But I thought, this bird really loves bread because it's taken off with an entire slice. But it was something I'd never seen before. So we had this is an online sponsor, FTB Inc., and they have a product that they call their Bread and Beak Fest. I thought it was a very clever play on words here. And what this is, they've developed a loaf of bread made from resin. And it's a hollow loaf of bread, but it looks like a loaf of bread that can serve at the buyer's choice as either a bird feeder or a three-unit bird condo.
Whoa!
If you mount this vertically, it's a feeder. If you mount it horizontally, it becomes a three-unit birdhouse. So it comes with a kit that you can make the choice on which door to put on it, I guess, for lack of a better term, to make it either a feeder or a three-unit bird condo. So this is kind of the choice, and this is available online through the FTB Inc. Website for $39.95. But wait, they understand that, if you've ever bought anything where it comes with extra parts because there's different options that you can, how you assemble something, you always hate to throw away those extra parts just in case you change your mind and decide, I want to do something different. Well, they understand this because this comes with the two different parts, whether to make it a feeder or a bird condo. And so for their spring special, which, spring is about to start here, so between now and when summer starts in June, you can, for an additional $19.95, get a second resin loaf of bread that doesn't come with the extra parts. So you can use your leftover parts. So you could have both the condo and the feeder. And they look like loaves of bread because they're thinking about this crow that was flying off with a slice of bread. It certainly would recognize a loaf of bread. And, if they go to the feeder they go to the loaf of bread for the feeder part to get food, or they recognize, hey, who wouldn't want to live in a loaf of bread if you're a bird?
Well, and I would think, Jay, that this is going to mean that you would have perhaps diverse species coming to your feeder that you don't ordinarily see. If you're typically putting out the seeds, that's going to attract certain birds, but there may be birds out there like this crow. You never see crows at a bird feeder, but they might very well want to frequent that loaf of bread, hoping that they'll find something a little bit different that's more appealing to their diet.
Yeah, maybe the company will hear my story about the crow with the slice of bread, and maybe they can develop a feeder that you can put stale slices of bread right in there for those big birds that can pull one out and fly off.
And that's certainly a much better use of stale bread than to just throw it away in the trash.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and if, some people that don't like their crust, the birds would probably be happy to take those off their hands.
That makes perfect sense. Waste not, want not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that we haven't got a topic in mind yet for our next episode, but we're going to have a next episode. We just don't know what we're going to be talking about, but we'll have something interesting to come up with. So our listeners should tune in another couple of weeks and see what has excited us enough to have a conversation about it.
Yep, and in the meantime, as we always encourage them, if you have some topics you'd like us to discuss, feel free to use the contact information and let us know. That's right.
We would welcome any suggestions.
for listening today. We hope you enjoyed the show. Manager Brothers Lessons Learned is a production of Gregg Guidance, LLC, a multi-specialty consulting firm offering interim management, group process facilitation, workflow analysis, operational studies, and more to local governments in Michigan and beyond.